David Kidder, how are you? This is Jim Dulanbakis, everyone. Welcome.
Hi, Jim.
Welcome, everyone. Today, we have our Founders series here with David Kidder from Bionic. Please introduce yourselves in the chat. Put your title, your location. If you have any questions, please place them in the chat. For those of you that are new to Entre, Entre is a social network for entrepreneurs to connect, collaborate, share resources and knowledge. Our app is out, so please sign up at joinentre.com. The app is, we have it on iOS and Android. We have several events each month, from workshops to founder and investor interview series, panels, and also pitch competitions. David, thank you for coming. David Kidder is an experienced entrepreneur and angel investor in over 40 companies. He's currently the co-founder and CEO of Bionic. He's also a New York Times best-selling author for a few books, New Big, Startup Playbook, and the Intellectual Devotional, which we're going to get into once we begin. David, welcome. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm very grateful.
So David, thank you for taking the time. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Let's begin in the beginning. Where did you grow up? Did you have entrepreneurship around you, or did you just become an entrepreneur by accident?
It always begins at the beginning, right? There you go. So I grew up in upstate New York, outside of Albany, a place called Guilderland, and started middle-class family, educated but not entrepreneurship at all, and then started with a paper route. And the first material item I wanted was a Wilson Sting tennis racket that I had to put on layaway at Montgomery Ward, and realized I'm going to have to hustle to make it all work in life. And so started right back in a paper route in the snow, and never really stopped. And I studied at RIT in Rochester, New York, and loved that experience, and started my first company in right at the end of college. Ended up selling that a couple years later and moving to New York City and doing a roll-up. We ended up joined a group who had taken that public, and then left and started another company called SmartRay, which we ended up selling about 3 years later. And then the dot-com boom happened. And then it actually ended at that point. And then took a couple of years off, traveled the world, got back and started another company, and raised a bunch of money for that, another SaaS company, and started writing books as a side hustle and having kids. I have 3 sons. And then most recently, the last 7 years, have continued to invest and write, but also building a bootstrap startup, about 55 people now, a little over 20 million revenue. And what we do is we work with large organizations to drive entrepreneurship and growth mindset as a way of managing and leading the company. So it's been a really fun journey, very grateful. Entrepreneurship is my career, and I love this conversation, and hopefully can draw from that experience and help contribute to other people's journeys who are all along those paths.
Okay, awesome. So you time warped all the way to now. So I got to go back. I got to go back and wheel this back a little bit. So paper route as a kid, right? A lot of entrepreneurs have that story that's happened to them. They started out just paper routing. You went to college. How did you start your first company? Was NextX? Was that
NetX? Yeah.
NetX?
Yeah,
okay.
I started with a company called the Idea Group in college. I was studying industrial design and ME, and a guy named Bill Gillette kind of picked me out of the students and asked me to come help him do some work at his startup. And so beautiful office, fun. I was probably 19 at the time, and just really got the bug that I would probably work for myself. And so he kind of got me started, and then, at the time, it was 1995, 96. It was the dawn of the internet. You could actually go on a registered domain, at ICANN without any cost. And so started my first company out of his office called NetX, which is web development and authoring tools for ad agencies. And we ended up building that up, and it didn't get very big, but it was we ended up selling that to a company called Target Vision and being their internet division. And then after integrating that, left to move to New York and join a team doing a roll-up back by Omnicom that we ultimately took public. And that grew very fast. It was a handful of acquisitions and organic growth. So yeah, so it's been in the blood. I just got started working around, working for yourself, and that was a really attractive idea for my career.
So two questions. One, explain what a roll-up is, and then two, you said working for yourself was very attractive to you. Why was that attractive?
Well, a roll-up is when you acquire, let's say there's a problem in the world and you start acquiring companies that solve that same problem. So there's a thesis around how you can, buy one company that does one type of service, geographically speaking, or by industry, but collectively they do the same thing. Could be engineering, could be web, whatever. And you just grow in revenue much faster. So it's in a way, it's like acquiring revenue. And that was our strategy in that business. As it relates to your second part question, working for the bug for like starting my own company really started the idea that, wealth is mostly created because you own a significant portion of an asset. And so there's lots of ways to create wealth. There's ways to save it and there's sort for it and get compounding interest, which is the most powerful force in the universe, of course. But ultimately, even though you're earning money, the question is what do you actually own? And I think that I learned very young that to get a disruptive outcome, you had to be very deep into the cap table of an outcome and creating value. And so, and also it takes many companies to learn how to become a good founder. It's very, very rarely that it happens on your first shot. It's like any professional endeavor or sport. It takes, classic overnight success takes 10 years in the making. And you typically take one or two companies before you learn the job of being a founder, which is not easy.
Or you decide you don't want to do it at all after the first one, and you say, I'm going to walk away.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, there's a tremendous amount of risk. I mean, I have friends who got really good at one or two very good skills, who were out in the valley. I won't name him, but his job was really the director of monetization. He's very good at model innovation and getting the company from like 0 to 50 to 100 million revenue. And he did it 3 times in his career. He did it at Google, he did it at Facebook, and he did it at Pinterest. First 10 employees at every place. And he made $1 billion. So while he wasn't the founder, he had a really powerful superpower that he put in a place that had the greatest wealth creation for him, which in fact was kind of unknowable at the time. But that in itself, he knew he wasn't the creator. He was always the second or third person in. And that's also a fantastic career. It just means you get a different journey. The founder's journey is typically 1 or 0. It works, and you do well financially, or you end up inevitably starting over back to 0 in almost every case. And I think you have to accept that because you're going to end up with 10 times as much. That's a greater risk, but also there's very little situations that it's not completely and ultimately your responsibility for guiding the company.
So let me ask you this. I love what you're saying here. So it takes a couple of companies to actually get into the mindset. So is it true that after the first startup, on the second one, the probability of success actually goes up for you, or in some essence, in the third and the fourth, and so on? Or is that not true because maybe you just haven't found your spot or where you're supposed to be?
Well, I mean, there's a very interesting statistic out there that says a venture capitalist is less likely to invest in a successful entrepreneur than it is a failed entrepreneur if they're for the second time. So if you go and raise money from a VC, and I've raised a ton of venture capital over the years, if you're successful for them and it's your first time, it's unlikely they're going to invest in you again because they know it's probably good fortune and timing, an outside force. Unless you're extraordinary. But if you're extraordinary and you fail, they're more likely to invest in you because they know the player. They know why it didn't work. But a lot of cases when you're successful as a startup, sometimes the reason has nothing to do with you. It's because you bet in the future and the future showed up and, all of a sudden it was a crazy, acquisition environment for your type of company. So while, luck is for little people, there is also these forces that you take advantage of. So I think that's part of it. The second part is that the job of a founder is really only 3 things. And this comes from Fred Wilson at US Square Ventures, who's one of our venture capitalists long ago, he and Albert Wenger. And they were really this. One is you need a vision And your vision usually sets to span about 3 years. It needs to be clear and timeless, and it never changes. But in order to deliver that vision, over those 3 years, you pretty much have to be right and on time. The first year, you have to be almost perfect quarter by quarter. The second part of your job is just talent. You have to hire the people who can deliver on that vision in the right order with almost out a mistake. So 0 to 20 employees, you cannot make a mistake in hiring. So by the time you get someone in and they screw it up and you replace them, it's a year into the company and you're out of money. So it's fatal. 20 through 50, you get 2 or 3 mistakes, and 50 through 100, you might get 5 or 6. So you actually have to be pretty perfect on your hiring. And the third is never run out of money. It's either earn it or you raise it. And so those jobs are incredibly hard to get right. Timing, talent, and capital to actually build an outcome. So I would just say that like getting those instincts right and those skills becomes a job of prediction and early assessment of where you are in the journey. And that actually just hovers over the other areas of execution: product, marketing, culture. All those things have to work as a skill. And whether you hire the talent to lead or you do, you just have to learn to do those jobs. It's an all-encompassing type of skill.
All right, I love it. So, so let's break that down, because the first part is your vision. So let's clarify that a little bit, because I wasn't too sure. The vision has to be crystal clear for 3 years, but it has to be timeless, meaning that the problem you're solving is going to be an ongoing problem past 3 years, but your plan needs to be clear for the first 3 years. Is that correct?
Of how you're going to solve it and scale into it. So you're right.
Got it.
You want to be talking about, you want to be solving really magnificent, huge needs in the world that are never going away, and arguably that aren't that cemented in other competitive solutions. But I wrote a book called The Startup Playbook. This is about now 8-9 years ago, and I encourage you to read it. Actually, the foreword of this book was written by Reid Hoffman, as a friend, founder of LinkedIn. And I went out and interviewed and spent about 300 hours with about 40 entrepreneurs to ask them, how do you bet your life? Like, what are the qualities of the execution and the bet that you made that led to an extraordinary outcome? And they basically all said the same 5 criteria. And I call them the 5 lenses. It's actually wrote the introduction of the book. And they're the following things. The first is that you have to start with a proprietary gift. The proprietary gift is something that you know about a need in the world and how to solve it that leads to unfair advantage. And that's actually quite rare. So you need to start the company on a rare giftedness, an obsession on solving something that few people in the world can solve. The second is you have to have extreme focus. So ironically, the more things you do, the more optionality you create for your business, the more likely you are to fail, because it dilutes the attention you have and the limited resources on solving the need, right? So the more things you do, the less successful you're going to be. So that's ironic, because entrepreneurs want lots of options, and that actually accelerates their failure. The third lens is you have to build painkillers and not vitamins. I've been saying this now for a decade. It was actually originated that idea in the Startup Playbook. It's really about, how do I build chronic, lifelong painkillers? How do I solve chronic, lifelong problems? And how does my solution become a painkiller? Once you try it, you never set it down. Vitamins are things like, oh, that was a nice experience, but I can live without it for a day, week, month, etc. So that's very important to get those first 3 vetting criteria right. Now you have to run experiments over time, kind of in and outside those problems, to get the answers. It could take you 2 or 3 years to figure that out if you're good. The last 2 lenses are really on execution, and they're the following. The 10X factor. This is largely misunderstood by a lot of people, but the idea is that you want to asymmetrically invest in the one attribute of the company that's impossible to replicate. So over time, like compounding interest, you get so good at it, it's impossible to replicate, which leads to the 5th lens, which is you got to create a monopoly, hooks and barbs. So once someone comes in to your offering, they can't leave for at least 2 or 3 years. Not only because it's not good for them to leave, but also because it's good for you to have customers around to teach you how to become a whole solution. So those 5 lenses: proprietary gift with extreme focus, that's a painkiller, that is executed with 10X impact with permanence, i.e. monopoly, really creates the conditions in how an entrepreneur thinks, the lenses they view the world through that lead to disproportionate success. So there's the difference between company building and business building. And so that company building stuff is really about that first 3 jobs. the business building is really about the 5 lenses, and it all ultimately is about how fast can you learn to do the job of founding a company well.
Oh, it's fantastic. So you spent 300 hours interviewing all these entrepreneurs. You build this up. Let's talk about the focus part, because a lot of entrepreneurs here are new, they have some traction. How do we focus? You don't know for sure that your hypothesis is going to be accurate. So that's why I feel like some entrepreneurs might say, well, we're going to do these 2-3 things, right? But you're saying focus. So let's talk about that. Why is focus so important?
Well, you have limited time and limited capital, and you can't do that many times. So you probably only have 2 shots on goal to make a company work, because it takes so much energy to get a product in the world. And then inevitably, no product or company survives first contact with the customer. So it's going to fail. So the question is going to feel expensive or cheap, and how well will that shot be taken? So you can't conflate the experiments focus. So if you do a lot of experiments that are cheap, that's good. That's not lack of focus. It means you're obsessed with the problem. You're trying as many solutions to that problem as you can.
Got it.
But once you start adding different businesses as solutions, I'm going to build a product company, and a service company, and a laundromat, and like all to solve the need of whatever. But the point is, that's where you lose your focus, because each one is fundamentally a different business. Maybe it's the same need, but you're trying to build one great, magnificent business to one massive need in the world. The experimentation, there can be lots of value in there. That's not lack of focus, because your North Star is clear. So you can't let it. Now, if you're building a media company with a technology company, with a product company, with that turns into a hot mess quickly, because they're all fundamentally different proprietary gifts to solve them, right? A great app developer may not be a great, media personality or have the energy to do that. Maybe completely different. So that's where that question really, why it's the number one question, is because for that reason.
Fantastic. So we're going to pivot because we're startups, but we're going to pivot over to community. So you graduate college, you enter into a company, and then pivot into your own startup. In your lifetime, before this moment, was there any other entrepreneurs that influenced you that were in your inner circle or family or anything like that?
I mean, yes. My grandfather and great-grandfather were both entrepreneurs, but my parents weren't. There was no direct family who were entrepreneurs. We were actually quite academic, lots of PhDs, and we were largely middle class from an economic standard perspective. So it's not good or bad. It just was the situation that I was born into, and great. I have loving parents, and but I didn't. My youth wasn't a layup by any stretch of the imagination. And so I had, my uncle was an entrepreneur, my mom's brother, and his name is Roger Franceschi, and he was a clinical psychologist. We built a consulting firm, and he kind of got me started when I was 16, getting plugged into computers and early days of Apple and that whole journey, and it really lit a fire in me. And he just sort of mentored me along. He catalyzed me, and he actually sold his company when he was about 70. It's now in 2014, and promptly passed away from brain cancer about 7 months later. It was really tragic. And when he passed away, I was the last person to see him. He had a huge network and a lot of influence in the business world. And as he passed away, I was the last person to see him. He said this thing to me. He said, "Don't focus on who you are to the world, focus on who you're becoming." And it was a really profound insight, because I think as entrepreneurs, we're kind of junkies for the peak moments. We want the exit. We want all the reward that comes with us. We're kind of, there's a performance dope addiction around this stuff. It's sort of covering from that energy, that chip on our shoulders. And the problem is that when you get to the top, economically, relationally, whatever, you realize there's actually nothing there, right? So what he's saying is you have to fall in love with the becoming, the journey, the grind of the learning. And you really can't escape the timing it takes for that to happen. I mean, there are cases where you can be incredibly fortunate and hit it right, but they're so rare. I mean, there's 2.3 million businesses started in the world, and there's like a couple thousand that ever raised venture capital. So you see these larger than life stories, but in reality, almost all of them are ours. And so at the end of the day, you're just building a business. it's just a company. That's all, right? You're solving a need in the world. It's not, you're trying to, if you get rich, great. If you don't, you'll probably do fine if you care the most. So if you fall in love with that becoming and you deeply care about a problem and you're trying to solve it, in its essence, it's not about the company. The company is just a vehicle for that purpose. And I think that if you conflate this with money and wealth and timing and about outside forces, you'll completely, you may actually increase the odds that you fail. So my counsel would be what Buffett would tell us here, which is kind of assume you'll get rich slowly in this business, because it's most likely that that's what's going to happen unless you're incredibly fortunate, and you'll have to work your tail off. And I have done that, and I've had a couple exits that work, and I've also, laid on the ground and cried my eyes out. So, but you always build back, and that's part of the becoming part. So fall in love with that grind, because, success is a bad educator. That's just part of the journey.
We're going to transition into the next question, David, which is,
okay, great.
You actually transitioning into an investor, right? So you started these companies and you got to a certain point, you've exited. Actually, before we go into, let's talk about the exits of the company, because I want to tap dance around that a bit. You started all these companies, you exited 3. How was that transition for you, seeing the company, passed on to someone else?
I'm admittedly not great at that, actually, because I really build very rich, deep cultures, and that's usually a harder transition than necessary. So I guess I have successfully survived one where it was very much in concert with values. And then there was one, SmartRay, which was acquired for a technology. And so in that case, it was really the anticipation, which is how it played out, was to be there for about 90 days to make it work. And then I stepped out. So, everyone's different. Every company's different. Every journey's different. And so, you don't build a company exit. It's just a natural part of, your growth. And also you have to take advantage of moments. Sometimes the company is better off being acquired because it's at a bigger platform. And that window of a bigger platform, is open for a period of time. So unless you can get to it, if you don't jump and sell the company, you might actually harm the long-term prospects of it. So, there's all sorts of reasons why that happen. But I would just say that, you don't, as they say, you don't sell a company that gets bought. And so you have to be always ready for that outcome. And very often you have to almost always take that deal, because it doesn't happen very often. It's very, very rare that someone comes and knocks on your door and says, we want to buy you. It just doesn't happen very often.
And unless you're a very optimistic entrepreneur where you feel like the future is very, very bright and sunny, but that's not really true, right?
No, listen, I think that's all. I mean, listen, you have to be a little bit pathologically optimistic to do any company. I just would say that you have to be responsibly abundant in all this. And so the first job is to build a profitably, driven company, a good company. Now, if your company's linear and, if you spend more money, it doesn't exponentially grow, you'll have to raise less because it can organically grow. If it's a case where it's a massive market share taking type of outcome, you would go raise capital to capture a marketplace. So there's all different reasons why a company is venture worthy. But in most cases, even a lot of technology companies, you've seen this with Atlassian and others, they're really going after a need that exists, and they're just better. And as a result of that, they can bootstrap that offering because people spend money doing that thing. It's when they're spending money differently or into a new thing or new outcome, and there's a lot of demand for it, that venture is a really great tool to capture share. You want to end up with 80% of a new need in the world, as opposed to raising capital to get 1% more of an existing one.
That's interesting. I like that, actually. So let's talk about any tips or strategies if a company approached me to purchase my company, right? I know every case is different, but what's like a framework for an entrepreneur to kind of look at when selling their business, right? Because a lot of times they'll do cash with stock option, depending on which level it's at. But what would you suggest?
There's a million different deal structures. So just if you take the structure aside, because a good finance team, good acquirer, good banker who's advising you, lawyers even will be able to make sure they apply the right structure to any transaction. But the transaction really isn't the most important thing. It's the vision for the partner. Like what are we trying to accomplish together? And ideally, two mediocre companies don't make a great company. Two great companies make an extraordinary company. So I would try to find the one that was truly 1 + 1 = 10, because ultimately some portion of your value you have, you're going to have to re-earn, right? You don't sell typically 100% of your company. You're going to sell 60 or 50 or 80 or 90% of it, and then the rest is around milestones. And so if those milestones are unachievable because it's not 1 + 1 = 10, then it's probably a bad idea to do that deal. You can also tell a lot from the process of selling the company if it's a predatory buyer, if it's a competitive buyer. Some companies buy companies that shut them down. Some of them buy them for tuck-ins. Some of them are strategic futures for them. So all of those considerations just lead you to, one is make sure that 1 + 1 = 10, and two is that the economics that reward you for that 1 + 1, that compounding outcome, that those economics are aligned with that goal. You don't want, like, for example, if you sold your company and it was all a revenue earn out, but they were incentivizing you for share, right? Maybe you were getting paid to do something you actually couldn't achieve, or vice versa. Your proprietary gift was impossible with theirs to achieve the balance of the value you've been acquired for. Those just misalign incentives. So those are all things and mechanics to get right, but culturally and from a strategy perspective, it has to be that 1 + 1 = 10.
Got it. And there's been situations where the 1 + 1 did not equal 10, and the milestones were not met, and then it gets very tricky, right? Because now you've basically, right?
That happens often. I mean, there are known acquirers out there that design earnouts that are impossible to meet as a way to discount deals. So they're happy to give you a nice cosmetic number. You sold your company for 100 million, but in fact, you only sold for 50 because you're never going to get to that value. So, at the end of the day, you have to make your own decision. Are you trying to go for a cosmetic win? Are you trying to go for a practical win for your team? Is it a culture fit? But again, I would just say my advice is never build a company for sale. It's really not the reason to do it. The economic event should happen throughout the life of the company for you and the team, because not only does it profit when you're growing, you're getting paid well, but underneath that is an incredibly high valued equity asset that ultimately everyone will be rewarded by.
I love that. So let's transition into why you became an investor, right?
Mm-hmm.
You were an
I think
entrepreneur.
that was the question you asked, actually. Now it's back to us.
Yeah. And then I got excited and I derailed the whole question.
No, I have medically ADD, so it doesn't take long for me to forget things. I just had a lot of opportunity because of network and access and to make investments. And, I had a little bit of money and kept rolling it, and will continue to do that for the rest of my life, I think. So, never forget that about 70% of all returns come from 7% of capital deployed. So, in my case, 7% of capital is about 2.5 to 3 deals of the 40 will be all of the returns, all the unbounded returns. And whether those returns are 10x or 100x or 2x, the balance of it will be either I get my money back or it goes to zero. So, like, if you're going to be an investor, you actually have to get to a certain number of deals to actually get critical mass. So you can't make one angel investment. You need to make 20 or 30 to get the statistical odds in your favor that you're going to be able to make something return. So it's a very high risk, high reward game. As Frank Wilson again says, one of my favorite investors, is like, it's probably the only legal way to get 100 times your capital in the world. However, there's a huge, network effect around where those 100x returns live. It's monopolized by a handful of funds and networks and insiders who build halo effects around their networks. And so, all of that is to say is that it's an investment class. It's really exciting to participate in. But just like goes back to that proprietary gift question, you need to have a proprietary gift to do it. I wouldn't just take my 401k out and do that. I mean, honestly, economically, the best thing you can do, and I never did this, but my sons will, is just invest and start young. and allow that to build up over a long period of time. I'm much more of a high roller when it comes to like placing bets in companies and myself.
So let's talk about it. So you're saying 7%, right, is going to pay out, and that's all based on.
I'm saying is that 7% of all the investments you make, either by dollar or by volume, are going to be 70% of all your returns. So like,
right,
make 100 bets, 7 will be all of the money I ever make will come from those 7 deals, and then conversely, by volume. So I think the point is, the question you should be asking yourself, and I'll give you the answer because this is actually a behavioral psychology question, is, well, why did we make those investments, those 7 out of 100? Like, what were the decisions? And so that's where the lenses come in, because they have 2 qualities. One is high conviction, the question of why the entrepreneur and why now, proprietary, gifted, and outside forces. And number 2 is non-consensus, meaning that you make all of your money from ideas with the highest disagreement rate, both probably in yourself and among your peer group. And the reason why is because it's fundamentally new to the world. It hasn't been done. So the consensus would say it's a stupid idea, or it's a bad idea, or you're crazy. But so because the very nature of the job is to find something that's totally new, you're less likely to invest in it because you don't recognize it. So you have to seek the discomfort and really back an entrepreneur who has a secret, that proprietary gift. So all these things roll in philosophically and practically, not only to the work you do as a founder, but also as you do an investor to build a company.
So is that part of your, so the question I was going to ask is, out of the 7% of the 70%, that's based on due diligence. You're still putting in a lot of time in analyzing these companies. You're not just randomly picking a bunch of companies, right?
No. Well, there is the diligence part, but I'm not smart enough for that. I think I have a very good network of people that's taken me 25 years to build, who know my value of the world and I know theirs. And so it's really the confluence of relationships that help you vet it. So I'll give you an example. So, here's some AI statistics, a cohort analysis across 15,000 angel investments into a fund. So for a successful venture capital or angel investment fund will return 3 times cash. So if I invested $25, I'd end up with $100, and I returned $25 to my investors myself. Right? So I made $75 from a $25 base. So when you think about the number of investments you have to deploy to get those returns, it's about 20 to 30. And if you look at the number of hours you spend on each of those deals, right, to get those returns, if you spend less than 20 hours per deal in diligence, your fund return is 1.5x. If you spend less than 40, it's 2.8 to 3x. But if it comes through a network effect where the total aggregate due diligence with expertise exceeds 40 hours, which is what happens with a network effect, it goes to 8 or 9x. So you have to not only, so I think people think this is like, both starting a company, investing is like a lottery, and, pathological optimism, which I, often am, is the key attribute to building great companies. And in point is that it's actually not. Entrepreneurs are very, ironically, risk averse. They're very laser focused on return on time and capital focus, so they can solve the need to be alive when it happens, because they don't control timing in many cases. On the investment side, it's a very sophisticated, both theoretical and practical exercise to go build a fund and deploy it. The thing for me that I use is I use the 5 lenses. To me, I'm using network effect and that skill of identifying patterns through those lenses that really is the criteria by which I invest in, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. No, that's very interesting statistics. So, so you were saying there was a fund of 15,000. That's the numbers based on that, and that analysis.
I use it as an example of an exercise a my friend's company, Fundify, performed, which came back with some of those insights. And they just help you understand, before you go into angel investing, what's required of you and your capital to be successful in doing that.
Interesting. Very good. Very good. So let's talk about growth, growth strategies for companies, right? Now, you invest in these startups. What are you seeing, across these 40 companies? How are entrepreneurs growing their businesses? What's the strategies like? We know that talent, right? The team, the culture is important. Focus is important. Timeless issues, right? We know that. how do they actually grow their growth?
Well, I mean, every company is going to be different. So you know, some companies are relationship building, so you're going to need to build, you know, deep relationships. You know, some are performance marketing, so you can actually acquire customers and create value. You're selling something. You know, so I mean, ultimately, almost every company is either a product or a service. Very rarely are they hybrid. They can be. It's not the exclusion of that. And so how you sell that, how you grow them is going to be very different across both company, industry, both in norms and ultimately to whom you're selling, right? Selling to a C-suite executive at the Fortune 500 is very different than selling, you know, to a VP versus a director, both by budget, permission, power, timing. Startup to startup, SMB is different than middle markets versus enterprise markets. So each one of those type of both target and problem, need, and marketplace is going to lead a completely different strategy. And then, you know, my philosophy about this is I'll give you a couple just to help think about. And again, there's no right answer here, but these are just provocations for you to think about. Is here's two. One is this came from Peter Thiel, one of my investors in my last company, which said, you know, always start with super customers. And the best super customers are rich and in pain. And the reason why is that if you can get a huge customer who's rich and in pain, if you get them, you get everybody else. But if you start in the middle markets and try to work your way up, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get the larger partners. And it also may mean that you may not solve the small ones. So you have to really pick your marketplace. So one is, what's a lens to view the world through for targeting? And the second thing is just where you want to be in a marketplace. So my philosophy is super customers, rich and in pain. And then secondly is that you never want to be in the middle of really any market. In many cases, if you're in the middle of a marketplace, you're probably too expensive for the little guys, and of which there are an order of magnitude more than the large guys. And then you're often, you're not big enough or sophisticated enough with features, et cetera, to support a big customer. And so you're kind of stuck between two chasms. And so getting who is our customer right and what is their problem and making sure that product and market fit issue helps solve the question of how do you get growth? Because you'll know if I'm in the high end, middle end, low end of a marketplace, the volume is typically a pyramid, the Fortune 500, Fortune 10,000, and all of SMB, which is millions. The value of those customers and how to acquire and keep them are going to be very, very different. And then philosophically, as I said, I personally believe in the super customer model as a way of beginning. It's a harder road, but potentially a bigger outcome. But every business is different.
I love that, David. So, and just to touch on that, so it makes perfect sense. How many companies have you seen in the middle, and they can't go up, so they raise more money, but really the problem is they never really solve the problem for the super client, right? So let's talk about hiring, right? And then after that, we're going to go into a question about adapting startup mindsets in companies, right? How do you hire? You've had several companies, and you are super smart. So how do you hire people? Is it just through your network, finding those great people?
Well, we have a talent team in all the companies. So, I mean, I remember Ben, if you've never read Ben Horowitz's books, The Hard Things About the Hard Things, or
I've read that. It's a good book.
He's not only one of the most beloved entrepreneurs, but clearly one of the most respected. He's actually in this book, The Startup Playbook. So he has a fantastic profile there. But he talks about if he could pick one skill of any company that was asymmetrically stronger than any skill, it would be identifying, hiring, and onboarding talent. The first 90 days is everything, that arc. And so that 90 days begins early in the process, not the day of the hiring. So that first hour, that first day, that first week, that first month, we pay very close attention to. We want to hit the team running, connected, understanding contextually the journey, who we are, our purpose, our work, our beliefs, and then how do we get here? And I think teaming those people up so they can have the greatest chance to be on the right arc is vital. That happens long before they're hired. So it's more advantageous to get the wrong people out of the funnel that as a skill in some cases, than getting the right people in. So anyways, I think there's talent. I mean, it's totally fatal if you get it wrong. So it's probably the number one thing to get right in the first several years of the company, or I'd say forever. But you know, you can solve a lot of problems with an extraordinary team.
So let's take a scenario. You're a tech team, you're a tech company. A big portion of your workforce are engineers. You get an all-star engineer coming in who's fantastic from Google. They come in and they're just not working well with others. They come in whenever they want. What do you do with this person? They're producing. They're a huge, you know, they're really helping the company solve the problem that you need. How do you deal with that employee?
You know, it depends. I mean, there's a famous line. It's like the no assholes policy, which is one. But you could also have a culture that's too soft, too you know, not candid enough to each other. So if you get the candor correct, and you get it in the room, then you know it's easier to get the assholes out, if that makes sense. But also they're often, you know, extremely high performance. They are bar setting people because they expect very high expectation of themselves and others. And that's a very good quality. So I think that there's positive agitations when people's intentions are good, even if they rub people the wrong way. I think where it goes too far is when it damages trust, right? When you get to the point where people don't believe each other, that's really difficult. And some people are really just born not to trust, and I think you can't fix that. And so if you, again, going back to Ben's last book, on culture, you know, what you do is who you are. You know, in that book it talks about these 4 personalities. Like there's a heretic, and there's the a-hole, all these things, and there's these personalities that drive a culture. With the exception of that person I was making, that very high bar, you pretty much have to eliminate everybody else quickly. And so as you see these personality traits come into the company, you want to get to them very early in the interviewing process. And that only is discovered in the questions you ask them. So one of my favorites is from a buddy of mine named Tony Hsieh, who's the founder of Zappos, who used to often ask this question on a scale of 1 to 10, how fortunate are you, or lucky or blessed are you? And he'd only hire people that said 8 or 9. So 7 meant there was a reason why they struggled, and 10 was too optimistic, so they overlooked, you know, big problems with their personality. But 8 and 9 were hustle and gratefulness, and I subscribe to that fully. And then also there's a question I love, which is I always ask, which is, what's the one thing that people most misunderstood about you in your last job? And that question actually is a profound question, because what they're going to admit and put on the table immediately is, why did people dislike me? And as it comes out of their mouth, they put on the table, you're going to reveal a truth that they themselves didn't want to say, but also couldn't see. And they often laugh. They'll say, "Oh, I can't believe I just told you that, you know, I was the gossiper. Everyone thought I was a know-it-all, or I stole a bunch of stuff." Like, who knows, whatever it is. But the reality is that that truth is going to come into the culture anyways. So it allows you to put it on the table very early. So there's a lot of ninja things you can do to get the right people in, the wrong people out, long before you have to wait 6 to 9 months and a fatal outcome by having the company.
I love that. And when you're small, you have access, you know, to the employees. When the company grows, it becomes harder to manage and do that. But the faith of the company, the future of the company is in the beginning. So you got to make sure there's employees. And I love that question. That's actually a really good question. I'm actually going to steal that from you, David. So
yeah, great artist steal. I mean, it's all a remix. So go crazy.
So let's talk about big companies, right? So your current company, Bionic, what does it do, and how are you adapting startup mindsets in these companies? Like, what's the problems when trying to do that? You know?
Yeah, we work directly with the CEOs of some of the largest companies in the world, P&G, General Mills, Smuckers, Citigroup, like the others, over the last 7 years, to install something we call the growth operating system. And that was written about in a book that we just published called New to Big. And New to Big really describes the idea that venture capital and entrepreneurship are forms of management. So the same way an MBA administrates the big to bigger organization, the Growth OS, drives, discovery and growth mindset and the systems that produce growth inside of a larger organization. And so we've been the pioneer of this in the world in the last 7 years, and it's worked out pretty well. And we continue to, our job is really to ignite growth revolutions in the large organizations that produce, new discovery, new growth. But I'll tell you, over the last, 7 years of doing this, it was only 2 or 3 years ago I discovered really that it's really not about, money. It's really about the interior life of the leader. We are, all of us in this call, but they are as well, the ceiling by which the permission of the organization is allowed to grow. And ultimately that comes back to do you have an abundance mindset or one of fear? And, you kind of limit how big something can get in many cases because of that. And it's a scary thing to be uncomfortable for a long period of time as you discover the giftedness of the company, which is ultimately a reflection of you. You're trying really hard to solve something or be something that you're not. It never works. And if I look back at my career, the last kind of, 5 or 6 original companies, original creations in my life, only 3 really worked. And the places where it didn't work was because I was chasing money, or I was chasing, the whole arms race of startup fame or whatever. The original ideas, the things I most deeply cared about were where all the success has been, honestly. And the rest all end up in literally a puddle of tears. You can't outwork something you don't care about. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, I agree. And I feel like every successful entrepreneur has cried once or twice in their life, maybe even more, depending. But
it is it's a very, very difficult game of leading yourself. And especially, right now is one of the great leadership tests that we'll ever face, honestly.
And I want to go into that, but I just want to touch on what you just mentioned about growth within companies. How do you nurture that project within a company? What are the frameworks? Because like you said, it's either fear or abundance, and there's a ceiling. So whoever's driving that growth, whoever's put in charge of that, if they're internal, it's bureaucratic a lot of times, where they're just trying to save their career. They don't want to take too many risks because they don't want to lose their job, their position. So how do you build that? Is it just like building a startup?
Well, you're replicating the ecosystems of a venture capital relationship with startups. Startups are just solutions to a problem, and problems don't exist in existing markets. They're in portfolios of new needs. So if the leadership can invest through the stages of raising up an idea, 0 to 100 million, seed, ABC, what that job is, 0 to 100, and they can invest in problems of needs as opposed to strategy and five big bets a year that all turn into zombies. They can actually get to commercial truth. Commercial truth lives in teams who can come back and speak it, right? So you obviously follow lean movement with Eric, getting that experimentation right and with a rigor, but lowering the cost of failure allows the truth tellers to speak to leadership, to the power to say, this is commercially true or it's not. A lot of large organizations are just simply intellectually dishonest because they have to be, because everything has to work. And if there's one thing you never do is you never invest in an entrepreneur who loves their idea. You only invest in one that's obsessed with the problem. So if they can't clearly state the problem they're solving in the world, and that is a massive, rich, super customer driven pain, you're building a vitamin, and you're building something that is probably something that's trying to make their idea work. And those are very fatal qualities and creating something meaningful.
Understood. Very good. Very good. David, so let's talk about current climate, because we were you were kind of dabbling a little bit in that. So you said that right now we're being tested more than ever in at least the last 20 or 30 years, right? What do you see happening? COVID has come in, has affected so much in so many different industries. One, how are you? What's your thoughts? What is your projections? and forecast on this? And two, how are you dealing with that with your current investments?
So let me break that up into those three parts. I'm going to add a part to those three parts. And I just want to noting, you can edit this out. In about 5 minutes, I have to be on with the CTO of a Fortune 50 company. So I'll have to jump in about 5 minutes sharp, but I'll close with these ideas. So you can edit that out, put this back in.
Okay.
You know, COVID is a disruptive force. We used to have to like sell the idea, evangelize that disruption is real. I think we've all felt it now. And, you know, psychologically, everyone, you know, there's been trade-offs of being at home and not in the office. And, you know, people are, you know, saving money or, you know, saving time to commute. But in reality, I you know, even for myself, and despite, you know, all the safety we have, you know, there's a lot of people who just aren't. And I think we really stopped for a second. I think we realized that everyone's just surviving. Like very few people are thriving. And to create opportunity and to create companies, things, you have to be able to thrive. And that means you have to get out of a sort of a survivor mindset and shift it to winning. And I think that's a very significant shift in the way people think, but also what you do. And so the question is, you know, how do you lead yourself and an organization when the future is unknowable? And so I'll give you a quick thought experiment with this, and this I'll close on this so you can you know, take this with you on your day-to-day journey of building a company, because it's honestly, this is one of those let your life speak things. This is how I'm surviving now and moving to winning. One of my friends and mentors is General McChrystal, and he wrote Team of Teams. He's an amazing human being. He's one of the great leaders we've produced in the last half century. And we talk a lot about like this idea of what's controllable and uncontrollable and knowable and unknowable, and staying inside that box and really meditating on like, what can I control, leads to really only two outcomes right now. One is that purpose matters more than ever. If you're looking for the energy to keep going, it lives in having clarity of purpose, which means what you care about matters a lot, and it has to be profound. It can't be, you know, fingers crossed, wouldn't it be great if the world did, you know, loved me or my product, whatever. It needs to be true. It needs to be deep. And the second thing is what do I do with myself? How do I lead myself every day when I'm making plans for an unknowable future? And the answer to that question is in a piece of research that a friend of mine, Dr. Sycamore Rao, did with the Navy SEALs about 20 years ago. When the US Navy hired him to come into the BUDS Navy SEAL program to figure out, is this the right test for Hell Week? You know, 1,000 athletes come in every 2 months and 20 or 30 come out. And this is all they ever want to do in their life. And 70, 80% tap out. How is that possible? And the answer to that question is really in mindset. So they came back 6 months later and they said there are two cohorts. One cohort of Navy SEAL candidates are taskers. They do the task, they rest, they do the task, they rest, they do the task. And the second are optimizers. They optimize their energy across all the tests. They predict what's coming next. They sleep, optimize, predict, sleep. And so the question is which group fails 90% of the time? And the answer is that the optimizers do. Because what is fatal about their mindset is that they're predicting something that is in its very nature impossible to predict. And that's what crisis is. And what gets you, whether in the case of Hell Week is 7 days or, you know, another 7, 12, 18 months, because to answer your second question, I don't think things are going to change dramatically till the end of 2021. In fact, they're going to get substantially worse between November election and the end of Q1, when we have one of the great battles for our democracy, because that's what's going to happen. And so this stress is going to grow. So I want you to prepare for that. But the cohort that wins are the taskers, because they know their purpose. And more importantly is they know what they can control. And when the day ends and they get rest, they can set it down. And they said, I did my best, and they get sleep. And they're there for a whole way to the people they love, their peers, their friends, their partners, their kids, in my case, your kids, because they can wake up the next day and start over all again. So the answer to the question is, how do you lead yourself, is doing the next right thing every single day from a cold start. Writing out the list of the next right thing. And that is not everything. It's inside the boundaries of controllable and knowable. And the second part of that decision is into your purpose. If you're doing the next right thing into your purpose, you have a credible claim to inner peace right now. And if you don't, and you're trying to solve everything outside of your control, outside of planning, in a true once in a millennial crisis, what gets you will be the fatigue. So my hope for everyone is that that's helpful in both mindset and action. And some of the ideas around the 5 lenses help you think about your own solutions to problems and the job of a CEO around vision, talent, and capital. And I wish you guys the best. You can get me at davidskidder.com, my company onbionic.com. But feel free to, also the startupplaybook.com. There's all sorts of stuff out there that hopefully is helpful. So very grateful for this time together.
David, thank you so much. I know you have to jump off. You've been great. This has been a wealth of knowledge. Honestly, I might have to listen to this interview 2 or 3 times to absorb everything.